Lion in the Wind, Chapter 22. Welk covered his head as a shell exploded above him, sending a shower of rock cascading down around him. He grimaced as a large piece of rock glanced off his shoulder. He shook it off and began to reach for his binoculars just as a Gorg soldier poked his head above the edge of the cliff. Welk immediately raised his rifle and fired 2 bullets into the soldier's face at nearly point-blank range. The soldier fell backwards and crashed noisily down the cliff face. Welk listened in horror as he heard the surprised grunts and shouts of other soldiers below. He quickly peeked over the edge and found the cliff face covered in Gorg. He grabbed 2 grenades from his belt, pulled the pins and tossed them over the side. 2 dull thumps and the sound of agonized screams came several seconds later. He immediately jumped up and began firing into a large company of Gorg soldiers as they clung precariously to the rocks below. Pentel heard the grenades and rifle fire, and immediately knew what was happening. The Gorg had launched a surprise attack amidst the shelling. "Let's go! Let's go!" he shouted. His platoon quickly raced out of their protective bunkers and found, to their horror, that the Gorg were nearly on top of them. "Grenades!" shouted Pentel. Each of the men grabbed 2 of their grenades, pulled the pins, and then threw them over the side. The grenades exploded one after another and tore through the Gorg ranks like a brush hog. Pentel's platoon then leaned over the edge and began firing at the Gorg closest to them. This drew the attention of other nearby units who emerged from their bunkers to find the Gorg nearly on their doorsteps as well. A desperate battle soon ensued as the Yigzin fought as hard as they could to hold their positions with shouts of "Hold the line," mingled with agonized screams and cries for medics. But, despite their determination, the Gorg continued to advance up the face of the ridgeline towards them, their numbers seeming to have no end as the Yigzin's strength began to wane. By the end of 2 hours Pentel had lost nearly half his platoon, was dangerously low on ammo, and had even been forced to fight hand-to-hand with the Gorg on several occasions. But, as the battle continued on unabated, growing darker and more hopeless as it did, something miraculous happened. Just as a fresh wave of Gorg began ascending the hill, 2 flashes of gold suddenly appeared overhead of Pentel's position and dove down into the advancing enemy forces with lethal effect. A moment later 2 more appeared and then another 6. This forced the Gorg to turn their attention away from the Yigzin as they tried desperately to stave off the golden terror that raged in their midst. But their efforts were in vain as they were cut down one after another with brutal efficiency. Pentel's men stared in shock at this sight before them as dozens of other lions soon joined the fight, their golden bodies flashing brilliantly in the midday sun like great tongues of angry flame. One Gorg after another quickly fell to their fury as the hillside flowed red with Gorg blood. Pentel and the others looked on at this in surprise. "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" asked Sims. "That's impossible," said Pentel in amazement. "I've counted nearly 80 of them already and there's still more coming," said Welk. "Do you think they're new lions sent by the doctor?" asked Sims. Just then 2 more lions leapt down from the rocks above and landed behind them. The men turned in surprise and stared at the 2 unfamiliar faces. "Who are you?" asked Pentel. "I am Pen. This is my sister, Teal. We are here looking for Chigani. Our mother sent us to protect him," said the first lion. "They went north of here about a day and a half ago," said Welk. "Then we will search for him there," said Pen. He then turned to go. "Wait! Wait!" cried Pentel. Pen paused and looked back at the lieutenant. "Yes?" he asked curiously. "Can you stay and help us drive back this attack?" Pen looked out over the battle and then back at Pentel. He nodded. "That is already being taken care of. Therefore I must go," he said. "Then you're not going to stay?" Pen shook his head. "We cannot. We must first find our brother and fulfill our mother's wishes. After that we will return and assist you," he said. "Don't go, Mr. Lion. We could really use your help." "We're desperate here," said Pentel. Pen looked out across the battlefield briefly, and then nodded. "As you are our brother's companions, I will leave behind some of my siblings to protect you. Our data tells us that he was very fond of you and your men. As such, I will make sure that my lions stand their ground with you until death takes them. But, with that, I must go as my time is short." Penn and Teal then turned and leapt over the ledge, quickly joining the other lions as they flowed down into the valley and soon pushed to the north. Pentel and the others watched in amazement as the Gorg fled before them like frightened children. "Wow, a whole herd of Chiganis," said a soldier nearby. A moment later 3 lions leapt over the edge of the cliff face and began examining the wounded that lay scattered all around the area. One of them then raced away over the rocks above and out of sight. A second lion turned and walked up to Pentel. "I have sent Neil Mara to retrieve a medic for your men. While you wait, please tend to your wounded. We will stand guard over you against any further attacks," said the lion. Pentel nodded his thanks and then set about seeing to his fallen men. Penn and Teal moved quickly to the front of the rolling herd of lions and directed the flow of their brothers and sisters as they ran. They moved as fast as they could for nearly an hour, selectively striking and then regrouping as they moved with great speed. They eventually located Chigani and his team, and then turned their group towards him. It was Rank who was the first to detect their approach. At first he didn't think much of it. But as the sound grew closer, his attention slowly grew more focused on it until it was impossible to ignore. "Do you hear that?" he asked over the radio. "No, wait, yes I do. It's faint, but it sounds like a stampede," replied Sabo. Pasa slipped around a nearby vehicle and stared off in the direction of the noise. "I see something coming, and there's a lot of it," she said over the radio. "All right everyone, prepare to fall back," said Chigani. "Wait, but that's impossible," said Pasa. "What do you see?" asked Chigani. "Hundreds and hundreds of us," she replied. This piqued the interest of the other 5 lions. "Say that again," said Rank. "I can't explain it any better than that. There's a huge stampede of lions coming our way." "All right, everyone withdraw to a safe location until we can figure out what's happening," said Chigani. The lions quickly slipped out of the Gorg lines and began to make their way across the prairie back towards the ridge line. But, as they did, they were soon overtaken by Penn's lions. They then stopped and stared in wonder as hundreds of lions just like themselves surrounded their small group. This was something they'd never seen before, and didn't know what to think of it. "Okay, this is odd. So what do we do now?" asked Rank. 2 lions soon emerged from the middle of the herd and walked up to Chigani. "Brother Chigani? Is that you?" asked one of them. "Who are you?" asked Chigani. "I am Penn and this is my sister Teal. Mother sent us to protect you." "Mother," said Chigani. Then his eyes went wide as he realized who they were talking about. "Persia," he said in amazement. The other lions all nodded. The minds of Chigani and his team then filled with 1,000 questions before being quickly returned to the task at hand as the Gorg began to fire at them. "What shall we do, brother?" asked Penn. Chigani's eyes narrowed slightly. "We have work to do. So long as these monsters bear arms against us and our people, none of us are safe," he said. Penn nodded. "Then we will fight by your side until death takes us, or victory is achieved," he said. The lions all then turned as one and dove into the Gorg lines. Black studied a small stack of combat reports from the front lines and marveled that the Yigzin had held on as long as they had. As he read further, Elgar rushed into the room. Black looked up in interest and noticed Elgar's anxious expression. "What's the matter?" he asked. "The Gorg are in full-scale retreat across all fronts," exclaimed Elgar. "How?" asked Black in surprise. "It's the lions. They're decimating the Gorg forces with near impunity." Black grinned. Interesting." He then rubbed his chin, and rocked in his chair for several moments as he thought about this. If this information is correct, the fight could be over soon, which is good. It will allow us to resume our original plans which got upset by this blasted war. What about the Midizin? They still possess a very powerful army. If the Gorg are defeated, we may still have to deal with them, said Elgar. Black chuckled slyly. If I have my way, that won't be an issue. What options do we have available to us for speeding the completion of the war? Not many, I'm afraid. Everything now rests with our army and the lions. Black leaned back in his chair and thought about this. See what you can find that we can use to give our people a further advantage in this war. I want to ensure that our victory is absolute. Elgar bowed slightly. I'll see what I can do. Odivian swabbed the barrel of his sniper rifle as a small campfire crackled in front of him. Do you think we did some damage on that last attack? He asked. Oik laughed. If they do not retaliate against my people soon, I will be surprised, he said. Maybe so, but was attacking the president of the Minizen and his cabinet wise? I mean, we just took out some pretty big names today. Fergant took a long, slow draw on his pipe. It was necessary. If we do not draw the Satizen into this war, no amount of technology will save your people, he said. Odivian shrugged. Maybe so, but what we did today was insane. You two almost didn't make it out of the compound alive. If I hadn't shot down those 2 aircraft, you'd both be statistics. Oik nodded as he rubbed his chin in thought. That is very true. But you did such a splendid job covering us. Your eye is sharp, and you saw many things we did not. You saved many lives today, both Satizen and Gorg. Fergant nodded thankfully. Yes, you did, and your assistance in our efforts has been greatly commendable given your initial reservations at our presence. Odivian smirked. Well, given what your people are doing to mine, do you blame me? Fergant shook his head. No, I don't. And I would not expect anything less of myself were the situation reversed. Well, you've shown me that I can't just rubber stamp all Gorg as being bad people. In fact, when this war is over, we're going to owe you two a lot. Oik waved the stem of his pipe at Odivian, and said, maybe so. But let us first win this war. After that we can decide who gets the most thanks. Odivian laughed. If your men keep fighting like they have, I don't see that being a problem. Oik pounded his chest proudly. It is the way of the Satizen, he exclaimed. Fergant laughed heartily. Here! Here! Odivian raised his canteen to the 2 men and nodded. Here indeed. Pentel looked around in awe at the vast number of Gorg bodies that lay strewn all across the ground. Some were even still seated in their vehicles. Oh gods, they stink even worse when they're dead, said Sims as he covered his mouth with a rag to filter out the stench. There's a Gorg officer over there. Someone check him for intel, said Pentel. I got it, said one of the soldiers as he hurried over to the officer. He rolled the body on its back, shook his head and then trotted back. Someone's already searched him, he said. Those new lions are a deadly lot, aren't they? I bet they're enjoying every bit of this, said one of the soldiers. There is no joy in taking a life, regardless if they're an enemy or not. We are simply doing our duty to protect our people. Nothing more, said Neomara. That's not what I've seen. You guys seem to enjoy this. Knock it off, Private. You've got bigger things to worry about than what the lions are doing, said Pentel. Yes, sir, replied the soldier. Ugh, I still can't believe the body count those lions left behind. It's incredible, said Sims. No, it's not. There's nothing incredible about war, or killing, or death. It is a horrible, terrible, disgusting thing to experience and should never happen, no matter what the reasons, said Pentel. Horrible or not, what baffles me is why the Minizen are joining in. What do they have against us that would make them team up with the Gorg? Asked one of the soldiers. Private, did you ever finish high school? Asked Welk. Yes, Sergeant. Got good grades across the board, said the soldier. Do you remember your ancient history class? Not especially. Why? There should have been a section in there that would explain a lot of this. The soldier scratched his head. Sorry, Sergeant. I can't think of anything like that. Welk sighed. All right, let me explain. Thousands of years ago our ancestors were a simple people who lived in walled cities, and worshipped a pantheon of gods. They were happy living that way for a long time until about 1200 years ago, when they suddenly threw off the old ways, seemingly overnight, to focus on science and technology. About that same time, a disgruntled councilman named Midison became jealous, and tried to crush this new fascination with science. He organized a massive revolt against the king in hopes of forcing everyone back to the old ways. Unfortunately for him, his revolt failed. He and his followers were then exiled to the east, never to be heard from again until about 200 years ago, when an expedition team, searching the northern mountains for deposits of iron, rediscovered them on the Fog Peninsula. That I remember. They were still living like barbarians at the time, right? Said the soldier. Welk nodded. Something like that. Just as Midison had wanted, his people had strictly clung to the old ways, and were living in exactly the same way as our ancestors had over 1,000 years earlier. But the arrival of those men awakened a long-dormant hatred and fear within them which had been passed down from ancient times. Fearing that we might someday return to wipe them out, they turned their entire society into a near mirror image of ours, technology and all, in just under 200 years. During that time they took their barbarian neighbors to the south, the Gorg, and brought them into modernity as well. Before we encountered the Midison, we got along well with the Gorg, and had even done some limited trading with them, despite how primitive they were. It is believed that it was the Midison that turned them against us, he said. So this whole war is based on a 1,200-year-old grudge, said the soldier in surprise. Welk shrugged. For the most part. Well, that's a silly reason to go to war, said the soldier. Has there ever been a good one? Asked Pentel. I don't think so, sir, said the soldier. Lieutenant Pentel, I'm receiving word that command is calling a halt to our advance. We're to proceed to that line of hills over there, dig in and wait for further orders, said Neomara. Pentel looked down the road and then turned to Welk. Does that line of hills look familiar to you? He asked. Welk nodded. It's where we were a few weeks ago when the lions left us for the better part of a day. Yeah. I wonder if our old positions are still there or if the Gorg have wrecked them, said Pentel, speaking more to himself than anyone around him. I'd be more worried that they booby-trapped them, said Sims. I doubt it. They wouldn't have had time to do that, said Welk. Well, we'll have to make sure when we get there. So everyone be careful as you move into the area. Let's try not to get caught by any unwanted surprises, said Pentel. Yes, sir, said the others. Elgar threw the door open to Black's office and quickly raced inside. The Sadisons have entered the war, he shouted. Black turned his computer screen towards Elgar. On it was a series of news flashes about recent events. You already, but how? The national news website, said Black flatly. He turned his screen back towards himself. It would appear that our intelligence network is getting slow these days if a common newspaper is able to deliver information to me faster than they can. But no matter. With the Sadisons now in the game, this war will be over soon. The only thing I'm curious of is how this happened. The Sadisons appeared content to remain out of the war only a few days ago. They were attacked by the Midison, who accused them of killing their chancellor. The Sadison, in turn, thought the Midison had made an unprovoked attack against them and promptly declared war. They are currently driving through the Midison homeland like a whirlwind. Black furrowed his brow in surprise. Well, that'll certainly do the job. But I wonder what foolishness possessed the Midison to drive them to strike at the Sadison, knowing what would happen if they did. I don't know, sir. Well, no matter. For now we have bigger things to deal with. Are we ready to resume our plans for the nation once this war is over? Elgar nodded. Black grinned fiendishly. Good. Now all we have to do is convince the lions to serve us, and we will be unstoppable.